Sacrifices are the price we pay to the unknown, believing that something greater is at stake beyond what the eyes can see. Aleister Crowley. Throughout history, some deities have become symbols of the absolute power that can be attained through sacrifice. Moloch, one of the most feared and revered gods of the ancient Near East, represents the destructive and relentless force that demands sacrifice as a means of obtaining protection, prosperity, and power. To those who worshipped him, Moloch was the intermediary between the human world and the invisible forces that shape the destiny of entire civilizations. But what drove these sacrifices? What spiritual secrets are hidden behind these extreme rituals? And more importantly, what did Moloch's worshippers truly believe they would gain by offering such valuable offerings? The figure of Moloch, unlike the more benevolent deities, carries an image of absolute power that inspires both fear and reverence. He represents a type of force that is not satisfied with small offerings. In the imagination of ancient peoples, Moloch demanded extreme sacrifices, such as the offering of human lives, and it was not merely blind worship. For the followers of this god, sacrifice was a necessary path to bargain with superior and invisible forces. Within this cosmology, Moloch was not merely a deity of destruction, but the very agent of transformation. Fire, always present in his rituals, symbolized both the end and the beginning of something new. As they watched the sacrifice consumed by flames, the devotees did not see only death, but the rebirth of a new reality. This cycle of destruction and recreation was central to the relationship established with Moloch, almost as if he embodied the chaotic power that, when controlled, could generate prosperity and order. This belief that sacrifice was a powerful spiritual exchange was rooted in the view of the universe as a place of forces in constant tension. Offering something of immeasurable value was not a loss, but a negotiation. The life given was a spiritual currency, a wager that human sacrifice could secure victories in war, protection against disasters, or even prosperity in harvests. But what drove people to submit to such brutal practices? The fear of natural calamities, wars, and famine was a constant in ancient societies. They saw in the gods, especially in Moloch, the possibility of controlling the uncontrollable, of influencing the course of life through extreme devotion. Nothing was left to chance. The environment surrounding the altar, the central symbol of the cult, was shrouded in mystery, where fire and shadow intertwined in a dance of power and fear. The image of Moloch, often represented as a giant metal figure with outstretched arms to receive offerings, symbolized the boundary between the physical and spiritual worlds. Contrary to what it might seem, the sacrifices offered to Moloch were not acts of uncontrolled violence, but part of a ritual that followed precise rules. The use of fire, for instance, was deeply rooted in the belief that it was the purifying element that transported the spiritual essence of the offerings to the divine realm. When the sacrifice was consumed by flames, the act was interpreted as the direct transfer of power between planes. But why fire? In occultism, fire symbolizes transmutation. It burns matter, but frees the spirit. For Moloch's worshippers, the fire that consumed their offerings was not merely destruction, but the release of energy capable of opening portals to the unknown. The participants believed that every spark rising from the offerings was a piece of their own energy given to the gods, with the hope that the return would be proportional to the sacrifice. This belief that sacrifice generated an exchange of power is one of the central pillars of occultism. Just like the sacrifice of Isaac in the Old Testament, a supreme test of faith, the offerings to Moloch were seen as acts of absolute devotion, gestures that united the divine and the human. Sacrifice was both an act of submission and of expectation. It was believed that by offering what was most precious, the gods would reciprocate with favors, prosperity, or protection. Festivals dedicated to Moloch involved not only the priests and families who brought their sacrifices, but the entire community. These were events of great social importance, where people gathered to witness and participate in a ritual that defined the collective destiny. Human sacrifice, being the highest degree of offering, symbolized a people's willingness to ensure their spiritual survival at any cost. This created an atmosphere of reverence and fear, a collective acknowledgement of Moloch's destructive and creative power. However, these rituals had more layers than just the act of offering a life. They also involved the careful preparation of the minds and spirits of the participants. Before performing the sacrifice, devotees were led through a series of practices, including fasting, meditation, and purification. These practices were fundamental, as it was believed that the intention with which the sacrifice was offered played a crucial role in the spiritual outcome. The mental preparation determined whether the sacrifice would be accepted and rewarded. The spiritual exchange present in these rituals still echoes in modern esoteric practices. Although physical sacrifice is no longer performed, the concept of renunciation and energetic offering persists. In contemporary magic, the practitioner often offers a part of themselves, whether an emotion, a desire, or a limitation, in exchange for spiritual power or knowledge. The energy released through this symbolic sacrifice is seen as a key that opens portals to higher realms. Even without fire altars and metal statues, the concept of spiritual sacrifice has survived in various religious and occult practices. The great offerings of old have been replaced by more subtle sacrifices, such as the renunciation of negative patterns, selfishness, or personal limitations. However, the principle remains the same. Sacrifice is a means of spiritual transformation. The force of Moloch is still evoked by those who understand the power of destruction as a prelude to rebirth. Sacrifice, far from being merely an act of pain and loss, is seen as a tool of creation, where the old is consumed to make way for the new. This cycle of death and rebirth is what keeps Moloch's legacy alive in today's occult and spiritual traditions. The occult tradition, especially regarding ceremonial magic, has always emphasized the importance of sacrifice, but not necessarily in the literal sense practiced by Moloch's ancient worshippers. Sacrifice in modern magic is symbolic, representing the renunciation of aspects of the ego or material attachments in exchange for a deeper connection with the spiritual. Even so, Moloch's legacy as the god who demanded extreme sacrifices persists in the occult imagination as a powerful symbol of transformation. In ceremonial magic, sacrifice is often used as a means of purification and focus. By sacrificing something, even symbolically, the practitioner reaffirms their commitment to the magical process. The renunciation of personal desires, fears, or limiting beliefs is seen as a way to make space for the new to enter one's life. In this context, Moloch is a figure who demands the destruction of the old so that the new can arise. Aleister Crowley, a key figure in modern occultism, wrote about the role of sacrifice in magic as a means of achieving true will. For Crowley, sacrifice was not a physical act of destruction, but an internal one, a renunciation of all the limitations that prevented the practitioner from reaching their true potential. In this sense, Moloch, as a symbol of destruction, can be seen as a force that helps purify the spirit, eliminating barriers that block the path to spiritual fulfillment. The practice of sacrifice and ceremonial magic is also associated with alchemical transmutation, just as in alchemy, where raw matter must be transformed into something purer. The practitioner of magic must sacrifice their internal impurities to reach a state of greater spiritual power. Moloch, as an entity governing fire, is often invoked in these rituals of transmutation, as fire is seen as the element that consumes the old and brings forth the new. In modern magic, physical sacrifice has been replaced by symbolic acts of renunciation. In rituals that seek transformation, the practitioner may renounce parts of their personality or material attachments, offering them to Moloch's symbolic fire. This fire is viewed as the vehicle that transforms these negative energies into spiritual strength. This practice reflects the belief that all creation requires the destruction of something old, and that sacrifice is the means through which this transmutation occurs. Ceremonial magic traditions, especially in the context of Moloch, teach that sacrifice is more than just a simple act of renunciation. It is a conscious act of destruction where the practitioner must be willing to lose parts of themselves to reach a new level of power or understanding. In this process, Moloch acts as the guardian of the alchemical fire, a force that consumes the old to make way for the new. Fire, as a central element in ceremonial magic, represents the power of transformation. In the occult tradition, it is seen as the element that destroys impurities and releases the spirit to a higher level of existence. Moloch, being an entity associated with fire, symbolizes this process of destruction and purification. By invoking Moloch, the ceremonial magician is calling upon a force that can help them rid themselves of what is unnecessary and prepare to receive new spiritual energies. This approach to sacrifice is also seen in initiation rituals, where the practitioner must go through a process of purification before being admitted to a new level of spiritual understanding. In many of these rituals, Moloch's fire is symbolic, representing the need to sacrifice parts of the ego and personality to achieve enlightenment. The renunciation of the past is seen as an essential step for the practitioner to advance on the spiritual path. The symbolism of Moloch as the god who consumes is not just a metaphor for destruction, but also a representation of the need for internal change. In modern occultism, this change is seen as a continuous process of destruction and rebirth, where the practitioner must constantly sacrifice parts of themselves to continue evolving. Moloch, as the archetype of this process, represents the challenge of letting go of what is familiar and comfortable to embrace the unknown. Ceremonial magic, as well as esoteric practices in general, teaches that sacrifice is a necessary act for spiritual growth. Moloch is as an entity that demands sacrifice, symbolizes the price that must be paid for the practitioner to achieve power. However, this price is not simply a matter of physical destruction, but internal destruction. The destruction of everything that prevents the practitioner from fulfilling their true will. Although the literal worship of Moloch disappeared millennia ago, his figure continues to exert a profound influence on modern culture, particularly as a symbol of sacrifice. in the name of progress or power. The idea that great achievements require substantial sacrifices is a recurring theme in literature, philosophy, and even politics. The idea that great achievements require substantial sacrifices is a recurring theme in literature, philosophy, and even politics. The name of Moloch has become a metaphor for the forces that consume humanity in exchange for a promise of advancement or control. Allen Ginsberg, in his poem Howl, portrays Moloch as the great devourer of souls in industrial society, an insatiable machine that consumes human lives to keep running. In this context, Moloch symbolizes capitalist society, which constantly demands sacrifices of time, freedom, and even mental health from its citizens. Ginsberg's choice to use Moloch as a metaphor for capitalism highlights the enduring impact of the god's figure as a symbol of uncontrollable power. This modern interpretation of Moloch is not far from his ancient representation. While physical sacrifices were once the norm, they are now viewed symbolically. People no longer offer human lives on fiery altars, but they continue to sacrifice essential parts of their lives in pursuit of power, success, or status. Moloch's fire may no longer burn bodies, but it consumes the time and energy of individuals striving for success in a competitive world. This symbolism can also be found in political and social critiques, where Moloch is often associated with the extreme choices made by governments in times of crisis. Wars, environmental destruction, and economic exploitation are seen as forms of modern sacrifice, where human life is often placed second to a greater good. Moloch's impact on modern culture thus reflects how societies continue to grapple with the theme of sacrifice in the pursuit of power. Moloch also appears in popular culture, where he is depicted as an implacable force that demands extreme sacrifices. In films and series, Moloch is often used as a metaphor for institutions or systems that devour everything in their path. These modern depictions of Moloch capture the same fear that us ancient worshippers felt, the fear that the price of power may be too high. In contemporary culture, Moloch is viewed as a symbol of the sacrifices made in the name of something greater. The idea that success or progress requires the renunciation of something precious is deeply rooted in our society. Just as ancient worshippers offered their most valuable possessions, people today sacrifice their personal lives, time, and freedoms to achieve their goals. Moloch, in this sense, serves as a reminder that every advance comes with a price. The metaphor of Moloch as a devourer serves as a reminder that every advance comes with a price. The metaphor of Moloch as a devourer of human lives can also be interpreted as a critique of how modern society values progress over human well-being. In the relentless pursuit of more power and control, we often sacrifice fundamental aspects of our lives without realizing the true cost. Moloch, in this sense, represents the invisible price we pay for progress. Moreover, the idea of sacrifice in the name of a higher ideal continues to be explored in many modern narratives. In films like The Matrix, for example, the sacrifice of individual freedom in the name of state control is the central theme. Moloch, though not mentioned directly, is present in these narratives as an invisible force that consumes what is most valuable to secure power. These stories reflect the ongoing relevance of the theme of sacrifice in our society, where the cost of progress is often hidden. Moloch's influence can also be seen in social and political movements that critique human sacrifice in the name of ideals like war or economic progress. The cost of such sacrifices is often ignored, But the image of Moloch reminds us that there is always a price to be paid. His fire, which once burned on ancient altars, now burns on battlefields, in factories, and in the streets, where human lives are offered in the name of something greater. In the end, Moloch's legacy as a symbol of sacrifice forces us to confront a central question: how far are we willing to go in pursuit of power or success? This question, which once haunted Moloch's worshippers, remains relevant today. Moloch, as an implacable force, reminds us that sacrifice is an inherent part of progress, but also warns us of the dangers of making sacrifices that cost us our very humanity. The quest for power, influence, and fame is a journey as old as human civilization. Where the sacrifice of lives and precious goods was once seen as the price for prosperity and divine protection. Over the centuries, these practices have evolved. While the literal sacrifice of lives has diminished, the concept of sacrifice remains deeply embedded in the human psyche, especially when associated with extreme success. From ancient rituals in the name of gods like Moloch, to the symbolic pacts permeating modern mainstream culture, the theme of sacrifice continues to influence individuals and societies striving for prominence and power. In various secret societies, such as the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn or the Ordo Templi Orientis, spiritual sacrifice is considered a crucial component in the pursuit of enlightenment and power. These esoteric orders, influential in the history of Western occultism, are known for their deep rituals aimed at transforming the individual into a higher spiritual being. Unlike the human sacrifice rituals associated with Moloch's worship in ancient civilizations, the sacrifices within these orders are often interpreted as renunciations of the ego, worldly vanities, and other aspects that hinder spiritual growth. To progress on these paths, initiates must relinquish significant parts of their former lives, material desires, emotional attachments, and even personal ambitions that keep them tethered to their earthly selves. The internal transformation proposed by these orders goes beyond merely giving up material goods or worldly pleasures. It involves the renunciation of the lower self, where the practitioner sacrifices fears the lower self, where the practitioner sacrifices fears, insecurities, and illusions to reach the higher self, the state of being that, according to these traditions, allows direct connection with the divine or the hidden powers of the universe. This process of self-renunciation is often painful, as it requires the individual to destroy aspects of themselves they once valued, in order to be reborn as a new being, stronger and closer to enlightenment. This idea of ego sacrifice echoes the ancient practices of physical sacrifice, but in an internal spiritual way, where symbolic death precedes rebirth. Parallel to these occult societies in the world of entertainment and pop culture, the concept of selling one's soul or making a pact for fame and success has been a recurring theme, often with occult connotations. The expression, selling your soul to the devil, has become an archetype for the price some are willing to pay for success and power in the cultural industry. While many of these cases are treated as metaphors, the underlying idea is clear. Extreme success does not come without cost. Numerous artists, musicians, and celebrities either symbolically or even literally incorporate these themes into their personal narratives, raising questions about what is truly sacrificed in the pursuit of stardom. Musicians like Bob Dylan, for instance, have made cryptic statements suggesting that at a certain point in their careers they made a deal to achieve the success they now enjoy. In a famous interview, Dylan mentioned how his success was the result of a pact he still maintains, reigniting debates about artists potentially making symbolic pacts in exchange for fame and prestige. While these statements can be interpreted as artistic metaphors, they touch on an ancient and powerful idea: the exchange of something valuable, be it the soul, integrity, or even mental health, in return for power. Pop culture is rife with references to sacrifice for success, both symbolically and literally. The archetype of Moloch, the devourer of sacrifices, appears in many artistic and visual performances, suggesting that there is always a hidden price to be paid for fame. Some artists adopt symbols and rituals linked to occultism in their performances, often as a way to express this metaphorical exchange between the individual and the power system to which they submit. Internationally renowned musicians use esoteric and occult themes in music videos and live performances, evoking an image of renouncing humanity or essence in exchange for public recognition. In this context, celebrity worship takes on a ritualistic tone where the individual becomes an icon, but at the cost of losing part of their identity and privacy. Beyond these representations in music, secret societies associated with the entertainment world raise questions about the use of esoteric symbols and pacts with occult forces to achieve success. A notable example is Bohemian Grove, an exclusive club frequented by political, financial, and cultural elites. The annual ceremony held at the site, known as the Cremation of Care, has been the subject of intense speculation and conspiracy theories. Some claim that these rituals, which involve the symbolic burning of worries and responsibilities in front of a giant owl statue, which some associate with Moloch, echo ancient sacrifices in the name of power and influence, while participants insist that it is all theatrical and symbolic. The mystery surrounding these ceremonies reflects modern society's ongoing fascination with sacrificial rituals, especially when linked to power. In contemporary life, sacrifice rarely involves fire altars or blood offerings, but it remains a constant. In many esoteric traditions and in celebrity culture, the concept of sacrifice is viewed as the giving up of something fundamental, be it part of one's identity, time, personal freedom, or even privacy. Sacrifice in this context is a form of renunciation in exchange for public recognition, power, or success. Many artists speak of the immense pressure they feel to meet industry expectations, which often leads them to give up their individuality, personal values, and even mental health. This renunciation reflects the ancient idea that absolute power requires sacrifice. Though now these sacrifices manifest in more subtle and psychological forms, the price paid for fame and power in the modern mainstream may not be physical, as in the days of Moloch, but it remains deeply real for those who walk this path. Whether it is lost privacy, emotional strain, or constant public scrutiny, the cost of staying on top is high. Moloch, the devourer of sacrifices, remains a powerful metaphor for the cost of success in our society. The image of Moloch is not only a symbol of physical sacrifice, but also of the exhaustion and renunciation that become part of the lives of those seeking to rise to power. Ultimately, the sacrifice for fame and power, whether in the modern mainstream or in occult societies, echoes the ancient practices of sacrifice to the gods. While stone altars have disappeared, the decisions individuals make to climb to the top often require them to give up fundamental aspects of themselves, The cult of power and fame, like the cult of Moloch before it, continues to demand its tributes, and the price, though invisible to many, remains high. One of the most powerful and universally known stories about sacrifice is that of Christianity, in which God offers his only Son, Jesus Christ, to be sacrificed for the salvation of humanity. The crucifixion of Jesus for Christians represents the ultimate sacrifice and the supreme act of divine love. He not only endured an agonizing death, but did so voluntarily to redeem humanity's sins. This singular event redefined the very idea of sacrifice in the spiritual and religious imagination. Jesus' sacrifice profoundly differs from the sacrifices made to deities like Moloch. While ancient sacrifices required the offering of something precious to appease or gain favor from a divine entity, Jesus' sacrifice, according to Christian theology, was an act of self-giving, where the deity offered himself entirely to reconcile humanity with the divine. Instead of demanding tribute, God became the sacrifice. This role reversal challenges the ancient notion that deities demand blood or death to grant favors. However, despite Christ's ultimate sacrifice, which according to the Gospels offered redemption for all, we still see that the practice of sacrifice is both literal and symbolic, persists in many cultures and traditions. This raises the question, if the supreme sacrifice has already been made by Jesus, why does the belief persist that the sacrifice of other lives, human or metaphorical, is necessary to attain power, success, or even spiritual protection? This question reveals an interesting tension within both modern and ancient spirituality. In Christianity, Christ's death is viewed as sufficient for the salvation of all humanity, replacing any need for human sacrifices. In passages like Hebrews 10:10, we read, "We have been sanctified through the offering of the body of Jesus Christ once for all." Yet throughout history, humanity continues to seek sacrifices, whether of others or themselves, to achieve what they desire. It's possible that this persistence of sacrifice has deep roots in the human condition. Sacrifice as a form of energy exchange or tribute to the gods was a common practice long before Christ, and for many cultures, sacrifice is still seen as a way to balance cosmic forces or access hidden powers. However, when confronted with the sacrifice of Jesus, a disconnect emerges. If Christ's sacrifice was intended to free humanity from the need for bloody tributes, why does that same humanity continue to seek forms of sacrifice? Part of the answer may lie in humanity's desire for control. Even with the promise of redemption, people often feel the need to do something, to offer something in exchange for power or security. There is a persistent belief that sacrifice in its most dramatic form is a shortcut to obtaining what is desired. It's as if humanity, even in the face of the greatest sacrifice already made, still seeks ways to ensure their prayers are answered, to bargain with the unseen. The sacrifice of Jesus, which sought to break the cycle of bloodshed, raises the question of why people continue to believe they must sacrifice others or themselves to attain a higher purpose. Is this a failure to fully grasp the depth of Christ's message, or is it a natural resistance to letting go of rituals that seem like guarantees of success? Within Christian traditions, Jesus offered his sacrifice to free humanity from sin, yet the tradition of sacrifice remains alive both in occult practices and in symbolic contexts of power. This shows that for many the desire to make sacrifices or demand sacrifices reflects a quest for something beyond spiritual redemption. It is a desire for control, for direct influence over forces that, in the eyes of many, still seem untamable. This contradiction between the sacrifice already made by Jesus and the ongoing search for human and spiritual sacrifices and other practices reflects a kind of spiritual paradox. If for Christians the ultimate sacrifice has already been made and all are redeemed, why does humanity still seem so inclined to repeat these sacrificial rituals in various forms? This question also reveals the complexity of human nature. Instead of trusting in the total surrender made by Christ, many still prefer to believe that they can manipulate the gods, spiritual forces, or the universe in exchange for favors. The desire for control, for guaranteed outcomes, seems to transcend even the Christian promise that everything was already won on the cross. It is a continuous search for power and an inability to fully abandon the idea that sacrifice is still necessary. In light of this, we are led to reflect: has the message of Christ been fully understood? And if not, how can we reconcile this thirst for sacrifices with the belief in a God who has already made the ultimate sacrifice for us? This is a tension that continues to challenge both theology and human psychology, and one that may never be entirely resolved. Moloch throughout history symbolized extreme offering in pursuit of power and protection. For his worshippers, sacrifice was a profound spiritual exchange, where the offering transformed into power, protection, or blessings. Today, though sacrificial rituals have changed, the essence of the act remains: the quest for control over invisible forces, renunciation in the name of a higher purpose, and the constant attempt to shape destiny. In our pursuit of power and knowledge, do we continue to make sacrifices, even in different forms, in exchange for promises of control over destiny? This is a question that has echoed throughout the centuries, and one that may never stop confronting us.